welcome back to this series that we're doing called Desperate, Where Life Begins. I'm glad to be up here with you today. I'm glad to be able to chat with you. Welcome to the online viewers. Glad that you're walking through this journey with us, trying to discover what this whole idea of desperate is. We started last week talking about desperate, started talking about a specific person who was dealing with these desperate issues, and I've been trying to figure out for my own self, what is it in my life where I can kind of identify with people and be able to talk about the right situation that would just scream desperation. I've been through some things, whether it's some specific tragedy things and financial struggles on a personal level. Discovering purpose is kind of what you do, not just at the beginning of being called into ministry, but sometimes in the midst of it. It's like, man, what do I do now? But I'm not sure how many times that I've just been really desperate. Just felt like I'm at my wit's end, because life has been fairly easy for me. Not sure if that's because I grew up in a loving home. I had working parents that allowed us to have many privileges that some people don't have in this world. I had friends that were good, positive influences on my life. I've been fairly healthy in my life, except for the couple sneezes I have in the spring, whatever that is. Life has been pretty good for me, and there have only been a few things that have really taken me to my knees and just brought out a cry of desperation in my life. But I think I know what would probably do that. I was thinking of the movie Castaway this last week. I got to thinking about this volleyball for some reason, that bloody volleyball with Wilson, so it got me thinking about Tom Hanks a little bit in Castaway. To me, this is just a great embodiment of desperation. So Tom Hanks plays this FedEx systems engineer who has a lot going right for him. He's very good at what he does. He's in love with this lady. He proposes and asks her to marry him. And this is on Christmas Eve. He gets whisked away to do his job, which only he does well. And things are on time all the time. So he goes out and he's on this plane, and what happens? The plane crashes. It's in the Pacific Ocean. He's the only survivor, gets washed up on this deserted island. Now, I know this is a movie. I realize that, and this situation probably rarely ever happens. But if I were to be thrown into that kind of predicament, I'm sure I would be at the height of desperation. I put myself there. I start thinking about this. I'm no Bear Grylls. That's not me. That's not what I do. As much as I enjoy time away on my own, by myself at times, I love a hike. I love doing those kind of things. Complete isolation. Without a single resource dedicated for survival, that would probably break me. No matter how many Survivor seasons I've watched, I probably still wouldn't get it right. I just saw this report the other day that there was this man that was stuck out in the Arizona desert for 2 days, and the only thing that kept him alive was drinking his own urine. Nope, I would die right there. I'm done. That's not who I am. But isolation would probably drive me to this desperate point in my life. I would think about life. I would think about relationships and decisions made. I'd be thinking about my regrets and what would happen to the people in my life if I died. I do know this, without a doubt. Whenever I am in a situation where I'm desperate, I turn to God. That's my MO. That's who I am. I'm the kind of guy who has a conversation with God. When something is up with the plumbing in the house, I'm talking to God about it because I know I can't do that kind of stuff on my own. My pattern for the better part of 20 years in my life as a follower of Jesus has been to rely on God for wisdom and direction in my life. Now don't get me wrong. I've failed many times. Decisions over and over again have got me into a place where I have felt like a failure. But those failures have driven me back to God because I recognize that I can't do life on my own. Some of you are there with me. You've been there. You felt that feeling before. That desperation causes us to be open to God. And there's bad news and there's good news that comes along with desperation. The bad news is that desperate circumstances seem to be increasing across the globe, whether it's through the threat of war or whatever else with poverty across the globe. In our nation, there's desperate circumstances. In our state, when it comes to education and all these other things. We can even talk about our community. We see poverty all around us. There's desperate situations everywhere. But the good news is that God is ready to deliver us from that desperation. Many of us have experienced that, so we know that, and we can speak truth into that. He's ready and willing to take us out of the mess. And desperation causes us to acknowledge our need for him and to fully surrender our lives to him. Now, it may not seem like an attractive option. That may not be the thing we want to do. But what we'll argue through this series is that this is where life begins. This is where freedom is experienced. This is when life is abundantly lived. God will give himself to you in a way that you've never experienced him before. So we've decided to highlight a few stories in this series to point us towards how people sought God in their desperation. Maybe you've heard these stories growing up in church, if that's your story. If you haven't heard them, that's okay. That's why you're here with us today. But last week we talked about a lady and how a lady named Hannah had responded to God in desperation because of her infertility and the societal pressure that came along with that in her life. Today we're going to look in the situation of the life of a guy named Naaman. Naaman, this may be a brand new story for some of you. Maybe you've never heard this name before, but it does a great job of showing us that there are times in our lives where there's a progression in our desperation, where things go from one point to the other, and it kind of points us towards God, because we don't automatically get driven to our knees. That's not where we are all the time. But you can probably look back on a situation and realize that there have been these different degrees of desperation in your life. And this story, Naaman, is found in 2 Kings chapter 5. So what we want you to do, if you have any kind of Bible with you, we want you to be tracking with us, whether it's digital, whether it's a hard copy of one. Turn there, follow along with this. We're going to have some verses up here, but it's always good for us to familiarize ourselves with the story. Not just so you can hear it and learn it, but so you can teach it, and so you can be able to talk people through their lives and their desperation at that time. So let's look at the beginning of chapter 5. And this is where it says, this king of Aram had great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him, the Lord had given Aram great victories. So you see what's going on here just with his position. You can see who he is through a text like this. Naaman, though, is not some Jewish guy like we get to know throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Naaman is a commander of the Aramean army. And this is about 850 BC. He's the general of the royal army of Aram, which is located in what would now be known as Syria. And you've heard of Syria, and you know the mess that's going on there time and time again. But Naaman and his position alone tells us a lot about himself. He's a strong leader. He's highly driven. He's a guy who's brought victories to his nation on the battlefield. He has celebrity status. There's fame. People know him. Everybody in the region knows who Naaman is. There's power. There's wealth that comes along with this position. And Naaman is the kind of guy who probably feels invincible in his culture. Then one day, as Naaman is going about his business, he kind of looks down, maybe notices on his arm this patch of skin that's a little discolored. Things are not the same as they usually are for him. A little later, he starts to feel this numbness in his fingers, a few other patches of discolored skin, and leprosy crosses his mind. This is something that happened in that day. Immediately, Naaman realizes his need of help. He is in need of help because this is not something that he can figure out on his own. He's facing something he has no power over. Leprosy is not just some skin disease that we can take care of today by going to the skin doctor. We can't do this stuff. This leprosy in his day was social rejection. It was isolation, much like Hannah was dealing with in that story we talked about last week, emotionally. There are parts of the world now where you can shell out a couple $100 and you can get the cure for leprosy. But that's not what it was in that time. This was the end of the line. This was a death sentence. There's no coming back from it. It's going to take his life. So I want you to do this. I want you to picture a man as powerful as Naaman, with great fame and great victory behind his name, brought to his knees because he knows he's going to die from this skin disease. And he's facing this enemy that he can do nothing about. He's completely helpless. He's completely powerless. There's nothing he can do, and he knows it. But he acknowledges it. He sees the issue. He knows he's in need of help. And we've all been there. And although it can take us a while to get there, right? But we've reached a time in our lives where something has happened that we don't have any control over. There's someone that we're dealing with that we can't fix the way they affect our lives. We feel helpless because we're faced with some leprosy of sorts. This is what it is. It's more than we can handle, and the longer we put off desperation, the longer we refuse deliverance. So Naaman has this new challenge in his life. He's gone from power to humility. And there's something bigger now that he's ever had to deal with in his life. But there's this girl. There's this girl who lives in his home as a servant for Naaman's wife. And we're not told her name. We don't know her name. But we do know that she's a Jewish girl. We do know that she's one of God's chosen people. And she's in the house of Naaman because Aram was this northern bordering country of Israel. And this had been invaded by raiders from Aram. She was basically loot for these raiders and given to the house of Naaman, this great commander of the army. Now, I don't want you to miss this. There's a lot going on here. She is a servant in the house of the very man who is responsible for turning her world upside down. She sees Naaman's leprosy, as most people probably could see, especially those who were close in his home. She knows what's happening to him. And there's got to be part of her that's saying, you know what, that's what you get. What goes around comes around. There's got to be something in her heart that's feeling, hey, look what's happened to you now, buddy. I mean, he killed her king. He conquered her nation. He forced her into slavery, into his house. But she loves the Lord. And when you love the Lord, you love people. Even those that might be hard to love. That's a tough thing for her, but she sees Naaman. She reaches out to love to his wife, in love to his wife. And verse 3 says this. One day the girl said to her mistress, I wish my master would go to see the prophet in Samaria. Now, her mistress is Naaman's wife. This prophet is Elisha. You've heard that name, maybe even if you hadn't heard the name Naaman. I wish he would go to see this prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his leprosy. So you got the slave girl who speaks into this desperation. And the question for Naaman becomes, is he desperate enough? You got to be pretty desperate if you're a guy like that with all this power and fame and responsibility to be able to listen to this kind of girl. Is he desperate enough to listen to a girl who is his slave? To talk about a God who he doesn't believe in and whose nation that he just conquered. I mean, this is how desperation progresses. The need becomes bigger and people start to find out and the ball is in your court and you have to be open to godly counsel. You got to be able to listen to the godly counsel of others. This level of desperation is one where you know something for sure. You can't do anything about it, so you got to start listening to some other people. Because you've been wrong a lot, so there's this tension between desperation and pride. You can choose desperation or you can choose pride. Some days pride wins out, some days desperation does because you know that nothing is going to be done. And this is a good place to be in whenever you choose desperation. Because you know that it's not in your court anymore. Someone has invited you here to church. A couple years ago, you never thought you'd be here. But things became desperate. You tried to fix some things, never got better. Desperation led you to be open to a godly voice. Whether it was a friend offering prayer, whether it was a family member offering consistent, loving advice, you finally became open to it. Others saw the desperation of the situation, decided to speak up in your life, decided to listen to someone other than yourself. And I think, as a believer, there's a powerful lesson here as well. Those of us who need to speak into these situations, like the coworker who had no interest in your faith. He starts to struggle with some health issues. Suddenly, there's a little bit more openness to your love, to your concern. He knows that you care and you have a desire for him to thrive. You got to speak up. And that's what's happening here. This girl sees desperation of the situation, and Naaman decides to listen to someone other than himself. So Naaman decides he's going to go see this prophet, Elisha. But before he does, he's going to gather up some resources for his trip. And first thing he does is he goes and sees his boss, the king of Aram. Naaman asks this king, hey, could you write me a letter? Write it, make it say this: anybody who listens or reads this letter has to cure me of leprosy. I'm like, well, I'm sure the king says, sure, I can do that. I don't know if you really understand how miracles work, but this is what you've asked me to do, and I'll do that. But Naaman also gathers up silver and gold. He gathers up 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold. And he heads into Israel on this entourage, carrying all this stuff, expecting to get this leprosy healed up because he could pay for this. Now remember, he is an intimidating army general. Probably riding into Israel with all these people and chariots around, shows up at the door of the king of Israel. This guy is the predecessor, or the successor, actually, of the previous king, taken out by Naaman's army. He's freaking out a little bit. He's like, oh no, what am I going to do now? The same army coming into my house, and he's asking me to heal him. I can't cure this guy. You trying to put me in a trap or something you want me to go to? But the prophet Elijah picks up on what's happening between Naaman and the king of Israel here, and he delivers this message. He says, hey, send him over to my house. Let's see what we can do about this. So Naaman goes with his entourage to Elisha's house to ask the king, to ask Elisha for help. And there's progression in the desperation of Naaman. He's recognized this need. He's starting to listen to godly counsel. And this progression now, we see this willingness to ask someone else for help. He goes to the prophet and he asks him for help, and he realized the situation was desperate. He'd listened to some godly counsel. This is where he goes beyond, I know what to do, I just can't do anything about it, so I need help. When was the last time that's coming out of your mouth? I need help. I mean, you came to somebody, you said you need some help. Listen, there's some believers in here today that would be honored if you came to them for some help. I mean, some of my favorite conversations as a pastor are the ones where someone has come and asked me, not something I've recognized in their life, but someone said, hey, could you help me with this? I can't do it. So I've walked through with some men because, listen, I don't always have the answer, but I know you can't do this alone, so let's do this together. It's not always going to be easy. I've been there too. Even on the simple things, whether you're trying to pack up a moving truck on your own, or trying to figure out some handyman issue at your house, or fixing something electronically that you got no expertise in. It's always hard for me to have an inkling of knowing what to do, but not being able to get it done. And it's hard to ask for help, but sometimes that's where we're at. That's how desperate we become. When is it going to be time for you to ask for help? How long will your finances strangle you? How much longer can your marriage crumble? How many more people can need to pay the price because of your addiction that you're not willing to give up? When is this level of desperation going to outweigh your desire to keep up your appearance? There are people who want to help you because they've been helped. They know what it's like. So Naaman shows up with all his people and about $4 to $5 million in silver and gold. That's what it amounts to. And Elisha sees him coming. He can kind of see what's going on here, that he's not coming in the spirit of humility. So he decides to send a messenger in his place. And I like, just kind of matter-of-factly, here's what the messenger says. He says, go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of your leprosy. Pretty simple. Just go and do this. Here's your prescription. Go get it done and you'll be healed. This is crazy for us to see something so simple, but what we see from Naaman is he's insulted and he's angry about this. He's come all this way with all these people, with all this money, and the prophet doesn't even show up. On top of that, he gets this ridiculous homework assignment, and then Naaman says this. He said, I thought he would certainly come out to meet me. He knows who I am, right? I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy, to call on the name of the Lord his God, and to heal me. So he has this understanding that this is what needs to be done, but he thinks so much of himself. He's angry. He's insulted. And what's Naaman going to do with all his silver and gold now? In his mind, he could still come out the hero. He thinks that people are going to see this and think he bought this healing. And since none of this is going to go his way, he turns home. He starts to move away from the situation. Naaman's officer, thankfully, speaks up with some words of reason. He says this, he says, "Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he simply says, 'Go and wash and be cured.'" I mean, if he would have asked you for $1 million, you would have given him 2. If he would have asked you for an act of bravery or courage, you would have jumped right in. If he would have asked you to go conquer this nation, you would have done that without question. But he didn't ask you to do those things. He asked you to go dip into a river. Why not just do it? And the question becomes, how desperate are you? Are you ready to humble yourself? Has the desperation progressed to the level of a readiness to obey God? Where you're willing to try something that God has asked you to do. Not something you know what needs to be done, but something God has asked you to do. And in the past, you haven't been open to do it. Didn't make sense to you. It seemed too simplistic. And it seemed like something that weak-minded people do. But now you're a little bit more open to it because your desperation has progressed. You don't understand it at all, but you know it's time to obey. And I would say to some of you who are desperate right now, why not? Why not obey God? You've been living in some sort of brokenness for long enough. Why not give God a chance? At what point are you going to turn to Jesus now? And when do you begin surrendering your life to God and make him your master and not you? And this is what it's come to for Naaman. So, Naaman went down to the Jordan, dipped himself 7 times, not 1 or 2 or 3 times, but dipped himself in the Jordan River 7 times as the man of God had instructed him. And his skin became as healthy as the skin of that of a young child, and he was healed. So very simply, the exact thing that was said was going to happen, happened. Imagine that. Seems like such a humiliating act, yet so simple. Just humble yourself and obey. I can't help but to think about baptism when I read this story. And God asks us to do something. We don't really understand it. But he's asked us to do it. And if he asked you to do a lot more than that, you probably would do it. You're not really doing anything yourself. Actually, someone else is doing that for you. But it's what God asks you to do. So Naaman goes back to Elisha's house. And this time, the prophet comes out to see him. This is what the text says. They stood before him, and Naaman said, Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. I mean, he meets God here. So please accept a gift from your servant. I mean, he's got all this money. He's still trying to pay for this thing. He's trying to give an offering here. But then the text says this, But Elisha replied, As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept any gifts. And though Naaman urged him to take the gift, Elisha refused. So in this worst moment of Naaman's life, this moment of desperation, he meets the only God there is, and this is where life begins for him. Everything begins to change because everything that he had, all the power and all the gifts and all the fame and all the world, did nothing to save him. Why does Naaman want to pay for this? Yeah, I think Naaman wants to go back and to tell the story of how he came out as the hero. But he's done nothing to get saved. The only thing that's happened is that he got delivered. You know, if you're a Christian and you've come from a place where you've recognized your sin. I mean, this is what happens when you're a Christian. You come from a place where you recognize your sin, you recognize this leprosy, you understood that you couldn't save yourself, right? You were willing to listen to somebody else instead of just figure it out for yourself. This is what happens. This is the progression of desperation. You're willing to ask someone else for help. You start to listen to the godly counsel of others. And then you actually do exactly what God asks you to do. You obey him and you surrender. Saying, it's not about me anymore. It's got to be about what you want, God. We don't get to brag about that. We didn't earn that. We didn't pay for that. It's not because you've been good enough. It's not because you deserved it. It's only because God saved us. And listen, that is the gospel. That is the good news. You were living in this brokenness. You were living in this mess. And you had to turn to God. And guess what? He delivers you. He fully restores you into this life that you've been waiting to live. And I don't know where you're at today. Maybe your desperation is progressing, and maybe you're here today to be obedient to God. Maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe you're listening today, and you need to listen for the first time, and you need to take this step in a direction where it's not about what I know anymore, it's about what you asked me to do, God. And if it's not today, you got to ask yourself this question: how much further am I willing to go? How much further am I going to have to go on my own before I fully surrender? How desperate does the situation have to become until you're ready to obey? Let's pray. Father God, we come to you humbly. And I ask, God, that you search my heart and you know how humble my spirit is. Because without any kind of humility, God, I am going to be in another desperate situation of still trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do in my life. God, I pray for those of us here. I pray for each one of us to come to grips with the reality that it's not us, it's you. That if we want to experience life, if we really want to begin a true and abundant and full life, then we come to you in desperation. Help us, God. Help us to come to grips with that reality. Deliver us from that mess that we've been in, and help us to give you the honor and praise you deserve. It's in your Son, Jesus' name I pray. Amen.